In the late autumn of 2025, deep in the wooded foothills of western Montana, Harold and Miriam Cooper had already accepted a truth that younger people rarely understand. Isolation is not frightening when you choose it. At 74, Harold moved slower than he once did. His right knee had grown unreliable after a lifetime of ranch work, and some mornings it refused to bend at all. Miriam, 71, had become his steadier step, his quiet watcher, and the reason he still ventured outside for air when the cold bit too hard. By then, both knew the forests around their cabin better than any map could promise. They recognized the weight of snow on branches, the trails where elk pressed the earth, and the evenings when the wind carried the scent of pine sap and silence. But that same silence had also begun to carry something else. For several nights, Miriam swore she heard heavy footsteps circling the property. Not deer, not elk. Something slower, heavier, deliberate. Harold dismissed it at first. Predators passed through from time to time, black bears mostly, though rarely this late in the season. Yet on the morning everything changed. Harold stepped outside to check the woodpile, and never heard the bear until it was too close to stop. The impact crushed him into the frozen dirt, a flash of fur, a roar that vibrated through his ribs, then pain so sharp it hollowed the world around him. Miriam's scream carried farther than any wind that day. They had always believed their age gave them wisdom enough to face whatever the wilderness sent their way. They were wrong. Survival, they would learn, is not about strength. It is about staying alive long enough for help to find you, or for the forest to let you go. Before we continue, tell me something. From which city are you watching this story, and what time is it where you are right now? When Miriam dragged Harold back inside the cabin, her hands were shaking so hard she could barely close the door behind them. She kept expecting the bear to push its weight against the wood, to test the frame, to return for the man it had already knocked down, as if he were nothing more than a fallen branch. But the forest went still again. Too still. The kind of stillness that makes every breath sound like a mistake. Harold lay on the floorboards, gasping, his flannel torn at the shoulder, and dirt embedded along his jaw. There was no blood pooling beneath him, something that terrified Miriam at first, until she realized it was because the injuries were deep, but not open. The bear's weight had crushed him rather than clawed him. His ribs ached with every inhale. His knee, the one that already troubled him, was now impossible to bend. "You're all right," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "You're still here. Just stay with me." But Harold's eyes flicked toward the window, the one facing the dark tree line. He didn't know why, not at first. Instinct, perhaps, or the memory of that roaring breath on his neck. Something in him understood that the bear hadn't left out of fear. It had left because it meant to return. Their nearest neighbor lived miles away. Cell service was unreliable, and even if they managed to radio for help, snow was expected by nightfall. Without Harold on his feet, without his strength, without the two of them working together the way they always had, Miriam knew one truth clearly. The cabin was no longer a refuge. It had become a fragile box in the middle of a predator's territory. And now, she was the only one in any condition to defend it. When Miriam finally got Harold inside the cabin and shut the door, the silence felt wrong. The kind of silence that had weight to it, like the woods were holding their breath. Harold lay on the floorboards near the wood stove, breathing fast and shallow, his face pale under streaks of dirt. "Tell me what hurts, Harold," she said, kneeling beside him. He gave a short, pained laugh. "Easier to tell you what doesn't." His shoulder was badly bruised, and his ribs were the real problem. Every breath made him wince. His right knee, already unreliable long before the bear, now refused to bend at all. Still, there was no blood, no tearing wounds. The bear had hit him with weight, not claws. That was the only stroke of luck they had. "Don't move," she whispered. "Just breathe slow." He nodded, eyes shut tight for a moment. "I didn't hear him, Miriam. I always hear them." She brushed dirt from his cheek. "Not your fault." The radio crackled from the shelf. She grabbed it, rotating the dial, hoping for a voice. All she got was static. A distant phrase broke through, then vanished again. "Signal's too weak," she murmured. He looked at her with a tired smile. "That radio's older than me. Picked a fine day to give up. The weather report earlier had warned of incoming snow. Not a storm, but enough to coat the narrow forest road and make a drive dangerous. And with Harold unable to walk, leaving him alone wasn't an option. "We need you off the floor," she said. He exhaled slowly. "Couch." "Couch," she confirmed. It took time. Too much time. She helped him sit up inch by painful inch, supporting his back while he pressed his lips together to keep from crying out. When he finally made it onto the couch, she propped him with pillows. His breathing steadied, though each inhale was shallow. "You're stronger than you look," he whispered. She touched his cheek. "And you're heavier than you look." The moment almost felt normal, until a cold realization returned. The bear could still be outside. She pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out. The ground near the woodpile was marked by deep impressions, bear tracks, and the place where Harold had fallen was obvious. The tree line seemed peaceful, innocent, but Miriam had lived long enough to know that peace in the woods could be a disguise. "Harold," she murmured, stepping back. "He'll come back." He didn't argue. She fetched the metal emergency box from the cabinet, a first aid kit, flares, a whistle, and old wilderness survival notes. Running her fingers over the laminated card, she read, "Crush injuries, shallow breathing, confusion, severe pain. Seek help immediately." "Immediately," she repeated under her breath. They really didn't write these for people like us. Harold shifted slightly, grimacing. "How bad is it?" "Not the worst it could have been," she said truthfully. "No open wounds, no bubbling breath. But your ribs, they're hurt, Harold." He nodded once. "You should try the radio again." She did. More static. A faint voice. Then nothing. The afternoon light dimmed early, as it often did in late autumn. The stove ticked softly as it warmed the room. Outside, branches shed the last of their leaves. Small animals rustled, all familiar, all ordinary. None of it soothed her. Then it came. A dull thud from the back wall of the cabin. Miriam froze. Harold opened his eyes. What was that? Another sound followed. A scrape, low to the ground, deliberate. She moved slowly to the shotgun in the corner, checking it with practiced hands. They weren't reckless people, but out here a gun was a tool like any other. She went to the small back window. The old glass distorted the view slightly, but not enough to hide what stood near the tree line. The black bear was larger than she remembered, its fur thick, almost glossy in the fading light. It sniffed the ground where Harold's tracks were still visible, tracing the steps he had taken from the woodpile to the cabin. It stopped exactly where he had fallen, lifted its head, looked toward the house. Miriam stepped away from the window, heart hammering. "Harold," she whispered. "He's back." He closed his eyes briefly. Curious then, or hungry? Either way, she said, "He isn't done with us." The bear circled the cabin slowly, its heavy footsteps muffled by the frost-hardened earth. She followed its movement by sound, shotgun in hand. The creature wasn't panicked or angry. It was patient. That scared her more. Harold watched her, worry etched across his face. "If he tries the door, I'll make sure he doesn't get through," she said. She positioned herself where she could see both the front door and the back window. Every few minutes the bear made another sound. A thump, a huff, a scrape. It was exploring, testing. Harold swallowed hard. "You should go for help." "And leave you here," she snapped before she could stop herself. "With that thing outside?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Miriam knelt beside him again. The fear she'd been pushing aside since morning finally reached her voice. "I'm not losing you like this, Harold. Not after everything we've survived." He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently despite the pain. "We've gotten through worse." But they both knew this was different. Age made recovery slower. Injury made survival uncertain. And the bear, they had no way of knowing what had drawn it so close, or why it was lingering instead of moving on. Another thud shook the back wall of the cabin, harder this time. Miriam stood, lifting the shotgun. The bear wasn't just curious anymore, it was testing the structure, testing them. "We can get through this," she whispered, though whether she meant it for Harold or herself she couldn't tell. But outside, the bear's pacing grew louder, heavier, and the truth settled over her like the coming snow. The forest had always belonged to them, until today. Now, it belonged to the bear, and they were trapped inside it. Miriam stood perfectly still, listening to the bear's slow steps circling the cabin. Each movement pressed against her nerves like a weight. She had faced long winters, broken machinery, medical scares with Harold's heart years earlier, but nothing felt like this. Something ancient lived in the sound of a predator testing a wall, as if the forest itself had leaned closer to see what would happen next. Harold shifted on the couch, a tight breath escaping him. His face strained with pain, though he tried to hide it. "You holding up?" she asked, lowering her voice. "I've been better," he admitted, but his eyes met hers with the same steadiness they had shared for decades. "You?" "Scared out of my mind," she whispered back. "But I'm here." He nodded, resting his head against the pillow. "Where is he now?" She tilted her head, tracking the sound. "Back corner, near the old chimney. Probably smelling the soot." "Probably wondering why you taste like cedar smoke," Harold murmured. She gave him a sharp look, though relief flickered inside her. If he still had the strength to joke, even badly, it meant he wasn't slipping into shock. Outside, the steps stopped. Silence. Miriam moved closer to the window, careful not to let her shadow cross the glass. The clearing was still. Snowflakes drifted slowly from the sky, catching what little light remained. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope the bear had wandered off. Then something massive brushed against the siding, so close the lamp on the table vibrated. Harold tensed. That was the wall. "Yes," she whispered. "He's too close." They had lived among wildlife for years. Coexistence wasn't new. They had seen bears before, even on the porch, nosing at empty grain sacks. But those encounters were brief. A flick of the animal's ear, a moment of shared space, then distance again. This was different. This bear wasn't passing through. He was staying. Miriam stepped quietly toward the front door. The heavy wooden beam they used as a nightlock rested against the wall. She lifted it and slid it into place, reinforcing the frame. She heard Harold exhale, a mix of relief and fear. "Smart," he whispered. "He's testing us, Harold. Bears don't behave like this unless something changed," he finished gently. "Food scarcity, early snow. Or maybe he was startled this morning. Nature doesn't apologize when it gets nervous." She hated how reasonable that sounded. Another scrape dragged along the wall, and Miriam tightened her grip on the shotgun. She pictured the bear's strength, the weight of it, the momentum that had crushed Harold into the soil. Her breath shivered in her chest. Harold watched her. "Come sit down a minute, sweetheart. Your hands are shaking." She swallowed. "I need to keep moving. If I sit, I'll start thinking. If I start thinking, you'll scare yourself worse," he finished. A silence passed between them, familiar, lived in. They had been married long enough to speak entire sentences without words. The bear let out a low huff, the kind an animal makes when testing the air. Miriam held her breath, waiting for the impact of claws or teeth, waiting for the moment the fragile line between inside and outside shattered. But the bear didn't attack. Instead, it walked around the cabin again. Slower this time, almost casually, as if deciding something. "He's not confused," Miriam whispered. "He's studying us." Harold's eyelids fluttered. Pain tightened his jaw. He fought through it to meet her eyes. "Then we study him back. We've dealt with worse than one stubborn bear." She knelt beside him again. "I need to check your ribs." He shook his head. "Miriam, focus on the real problem." "You are the real problem," she said, voice cracking. "If I lose you, you're not losing me." She pressed her forehead briefly to his shoulder, letting the warmth steady her. Outside, the bear huffed again, farther this time. The steps moved toward the shed. "He's checking the outbuildings now," she said, standing. "Let him check," Harold murmured. But Miriam knew better. Bears didn't just check. They remembered. They returned. She went to the radio once more and turned the dial, praying for anything besides static. A voice broke through for half a second, female, professional, then vanished. Snow thickened outside, cutting visibility. "I hate this forest today," she breathed. "It's the same forest you loved yesterday," Harold replied softly. "Not anymore." She paced for a moment, thinking through the options. They needed help, but the nearest neighbor was miles away, and the snow was falling faster. Even if she got the truck started, the road could ice over before she reached the millers. And Harold couldn't move, not really. Not enough to get into the truck without tearing something worse. The bear's steps returned, this time from the front of the cabin. Miriam froze, shotgun raised. A heavy shadow passed across the frosted window. "He's right outside," she whispered. Harold swallowed hard. "Miriam, don't shoot unless you have no choice." "I know." But her finger trembled near the trigger. She wasn't afraid of firing. She was afraid of what would happen after. Wounding a bear could turn a threat into a determined enemy. The shadow lingered, then moved away again. Minutes passed. The bear didn't return to the window. But they heard him circling, always circling. Hours slipped by that way. Quiet interrupted by heavy footsteps, the forest dimming into early evening. Miriam lit the oil lamp, placing it near the center of the room. Shadows stretched long across the floor. Harold's breathing grew slower, tighter. "You're hurting more," she said softly. He nodded. "Ribs. Feel like a barrel someone sat on." She brushed his hair back. "Stay awake. Don't drift off." He opened his eyes again. "I'm not going anywhere." She almost smiled. It was the kind of promise people made when they feared the opposite. The radio crackled suddenly, louder this time. She rushed to it, turning the volume up. A voice emerged, broken but real. "Emergency services. Snow advisory. Repeat." She pressed the transmit button. "This is Miriam Cooper, west of Pine Hollow Road. Injured husband, bear threat. Please respond." Static answered her. She tried again, voice shaking. "Harold needs medical help. We're trapped inside our cabin. Can anyone hear me?" For a moment she thought she heard a reply. Then the signal collapsed completely. Harold met her eyes. "You tried. That's what matters." "It's not enough," she whispered. He reached weakly for her hand. "Sit with me a moment." She sat. Outside, the bear's heavy steps returned, closer than before. Snow muffled them, but not enough. Harold closed his eyes for a moment. "Miriam, listen to me. No matter what happens, you do whatever it takes to stay alive. Promise me." She clutched his hand tighter. "Don't talk like that. Promise me," he repeated. Her throat tightened. "I promise." A deep thud hit the front porch. The bear was back, and this time it wasn't just circling. It was testing the door. If you were in Miriam's place, alone, scared, and facing a bear that refuses to leave, what would you do first? Share your thoughts in the comments. The first thud rattled the doorframe, not enough to break it, not enough to splinter anything, but enough to make Miriam's heart jolt so hard she nearly dropped the shotgun. Harold's eyes snapped open. "That was the porch, wasn't it?" "Yes," she whispered. "He's right outside." A heavy breath, deep, guttural, rolled through the cracks of the door. The bear was sniffing, testing, feeling the air for weakness. Miriam stepped backward until her legs touched the edge of the rug near the coffee table. She kept the shotgun raised, not aiming to kill, just to warn, to scare, to buy time. The bear moved again, slow, deliberate. Wood creaked under its weight as it shifted on the porch boards. A low grunt followed, the kind that vibrated in the gut, reminding Miriam of how massive the creature really was. "Don't fire unless you have to," Harold said quietly. His voice was thin now, threaded with pain. "I won't," she replied. "But you have to stay awake. Keep talking." He nodded, though his eyelids fluttered with exhaustion. Another thud struck the door, harder than before. Snow fell from the roof edge outside, shaken loose by the impact. Miriam braced the stock against her shoulder. "If you break that door," she whispered, "you'll meet God a lot faster than you planned." The bear huffed again, as if answering her challenge. Then silence. Not peace. Silence. The thick, listening kind. For nearly a full minute, The cabin held its breath. Then the bear shifted its weight, stepping to the right. She tracked the sound until she realized what direction it was heading. The window. No, she breathed. Not there. The lamp flickered as if joining her dread. She moved quickly to the side, staying low, positioning herself behind the table. Harold watched her with wide, fearful eyes. "Miriam, get away from the glass," he warned. "I'm fine. Just stay still." A shadow blotted out the faint light beyond the window. The bear's head rose just enough to catch a distorted outline through the warped pane. Miriam's breath snagged in her throat. She had never been this close to a bear without a barrier she trusted. Glass was not a barrier. Glass was a suggestion. The bear exhaled, fogging the window briefly. Its snout pressed toward the warmth. It sniffed, snorted, then swiped once. Not with claws, but with the flat of a paw, curious rather than violent. The pane shuddered. "Don't break," she whispered to the window. "Please don't break." The bear lowered its head again and moved on, circling the cabin. Miriam let out a slow, trembling breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Harold watched the ceiling as if trying to ground himself. "He's persistent." "Persistent isn't the word I'd use," she replied quietly. She sat beside him, feeling the exhaustion creeping into her muscles. How long had it been since the attack? Hours? A lifetime? Harold shifted and let out a soft cry before he could stop himself. Miriam turned quickly. "Your ribs? Worse?" He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he nodded once. "Breathing's getting harder." Her chest tightened. She couldn't lose him. Not now, not like this, with the forest closing in around them. "I'm going to elevate you more," she said, adjusting the pillows. "Tell me if anything hurts." "Everything hurts," he answered, "but do it anyway." She lifted him carefully, inch by inch. Each movement brought another grimace, but he stayed conscious. She smoothed the blanket around him, tucking it close. "Better?" she asked. He swallowed. "A little." She returned to the radio and tried again. The static had taken on an almost human pattern, rising, falling, teasing her with the illusion of a voice. She struck the side of the device lightly with her palm. "Come on," she pleaded. "Someone must be out there." Nothing. Snow thickened outside, swirling harder now, muting the world. The flakes tapped against the window like faint fingers. "We have maybe an hour of daylight left," she said. Harold looked toward the dimming window. "Doesn't matter. Bear doesn't need daylight." She hated that he was right. The bear's steps sounded again, this time farther from the cabin. Miriam moved to the front door and listened. It wasn't circling now. It was wandering, searching. Harold watched her face, reading the fear she couldn't hide. "What are you thinking?" She hesitated. "If he's ranging wider, maybe he'll lose interest. Maybe he'll wander off for the night." "Maybe," Harold echoed softly. "But he'll come back. Animals don't forget where they got riled up." She stepped back toward him. "We just need to last until morning. Someone might check on us then. The Millers know we get our mail every Sunday. If we don't show—" "Miriam," he cut in gently. "They might not come for days. Snow, chores, grandkids. Life gets in the way." She didn't want to hear it. Not now. She returned to the window, watching snow blur the world. The forest was becoming a single color, white swallowing green, erasing edges, hiding anything that moved through it. Harold's breathing hitched again. Miriam spun toward him. "You all right?" "Just tired," he whispered. "Not sleepy, just tired." She knelt beside him, taking his hand. He squeezed back weakly. "You can't sleep yet," she insisted. "Ribs that bad, you need to stay awake." He exhaled slowly. "Tell me something. Any story. The ones you used to tell the kids." She blinked back a sudden rush of emotion. "Which one?" "The one about the storm in '91, he murmured, "when the barn door almost blew off." She almost laughed. "That one, it's barely a story." "Tell it anyway," he whispered. So she did. Her voice filled the cabin, the crackle of the stove behind her, the steady fall of snow outside, the long, slow rhythm of survival. She described the wind that had shaken the rafters, the way Harold had run into the storm without hesitation, the soaked boots, the fight to secure what they'd built with their own hands. He smiled faintly, eyes half open. "You made me sound braver than I was." "You were brave," she said softly. They sat like that for several minutes, her telling, him listening, the forest pressing in around their fragile world. Then something changed. Not a sound this time, a lack of one. The bear had stopped walking. Miriam turned her head sharply. Harold sensed it too. "Where is he?" he whispered. She moved toward the window, listening. Nothing. Then, faintly, so faintly she barely caught it, the crunch of snow. Not near the cabin, near the shed. Her stomach dropped. The shed held food, tools, and the old generator they rarely used. If the bear broke into it, the noise could attract him again to the cabin, or worse, trap him there until he grew frustrated. "I need to scare him off," she said. "A flare might do it." Harold shook his head sharply. "Miriam, no. Don't go outside. Not with your speed. If he's close, you won't outrun him." She hesitated. Her hand hovered over the emergency box where the flares lay. He read her indecision. "Miriam, you can't help me if something happens to you. Stay in here." She withdrew her hand slowly. Another crunch of snow cut through the night. Closer now. Miriam raised the shotgun again. The bear wasn't at the shed anymore. He was heading back, toward the cabin, toward them. The steps grew heavier, more purposeful. The faint outline of a massive shape appeared between the trees. Miriam whispered, "Harold?" He squeezed her hand. "I'm here." But the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. The bear was coming back, and this time it wasn't just curious. It was choosing them. It was choosing inside, and night was falling. The bear's silhouette grew larger as it stepped out of the tree line, its black fur catching what little light was left. Snow clung to its back in soft patches. To Miriam, it looked less like an animal and more like a moving piece of the forest itself, detached and walking toward them with intent. "He's coming straight for the house," she whispered. Harold didn't answer. His eyes tracked the shape through the window, his jaw clenched against the pain in his ribs. The bear crossed the clearing with slow, heavy steps. No hurry, no fear. It paused halfway, lifting its head to scent the air. Its nose twitched, catching the smell of wood smoke, old pine, and humans. Miriam's fingers tightened around the shotgun. It stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under its weight. The sound echoed strangely in the enclosed space, as if the cabin itself were reacting to the intrusion. The bear moved closer to the door, snout lowered, sniffing along the bottom where cold air seeped through the gap. Harold swallowed hard. "He can smell me," he whispered. Miriam didn't doubt it. She could almost see the path of scent in her mind. Dirt, sweat, fear, all leading from the crushed patch of earth outside to the man lying injured on the couch. The bear huffed, then pressed its weight gently against the door. The wood groaned. Miriam stepped forward, planting her feet. The shotgun held steady. Her mouth had gone dry, but her voice came out low and firm. "You stay out there," she said under her breath. "This is my house." The bear leaned harder. The heavy beam across the door held, but the frame protested. The doorknob rattled once, metal scraping against metal. Harold winced at the sound. "Miriam." "I know," she said. "I know." She glanced toward the emergency box on the table. Flares, noise, light. Tools meant for signaling help suddenly seemed just as useful for warning something away. Another shove hit the door, harder this time. The lamp flickered. A tiny crack raced along the corner of the frame, no wider than a hair, but enough to let a thin thread of cold air slip through. "He's going to break it," Harold said quietly. "Not if I give him a reason to think twice," she replied. She moved quickly to the table, set the shotgun down within reach, and flipped open the metal box. Her hands trembled as she grabbed one of the red flares. They had been sitting there for years, tested mentally 100 times in hypothetical emergencies, but never actually used. "First time for everything," she muttered. Another bang. The top hinge squealed. She struck the flare against the striker cap. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Panic surged in her chest. Then the tip flared to life with a violent red-orange hiss, spitting sparks and smoke. The light was harsh, almost alien in the small room. Harold flinched, raising a hand to shield his eyes. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Giving our guest a light show," she said. She grabbed the shotgun with her free hand and moved to the small side window that overlooked a corner of the porch. The bear was there, its massive shoulder brushing the wall, head turned toward the door again. Miriam threw the window open a few inches. Cold air rushed in. The bear's head snapped toward the sound. "Hey!" she shouted, adrenaline cutting through her fear. "Over here!" The bear huffed, startled. She thrust the burning flare out through the gap, careful to keep her body behind the wall. Sparks drifted down onto the porch boards. The bear reared back slightly, surprised by the sudden flame and hiss. It snorted, shaking its head, then stepped sideways with a heavy thump. "Go on," she yelled. "Get out of here." For a moment, she thought it might charge the window, its dark eyes fixed on the source of the light, on this new, confusing threat. Miriam held her ground, arm extended, the flare burning hotter, brighter. The bear lifted a paw and slammed it down near the base of the wall. The impact rattled the dishes in the cabinet. Harold bit back a groan. Miriam didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. She swept the flare in a small arc, sending sparks scattering. The bear flinched away from the spray of light. Fire and noise didn't fit into its understanding of the world. It backed off the porch, paws sinking into the snow, eyes still locked on the cabin. "That's it," she called, her voice raw. "Keep walking." It didn't run. Bears rarely did unless truly frightened. But it moved away, first a few steps, then more, circling wide, staying just beyond the reach of the flare's harsh glow. Miriam held the position until the flare burned low, her arm aching. When at last it sputtered and died, she let the dead stick fall into the snow outside and slammed the window shut. Inside, the smell of smoke hung in the air, sharp and biting. She coughed once, then turned to Harold. "You're insane," he said softly, but there was something like pride in his eyes. "Insane is sitting here and waiting for him to pick the lock," she replied, trying to slow her breathing. Did it work? For now. She went to the window again and peered out. Through the blur of snow and darkness, she could just make out the shadow moving at the edge of the clearing. The bear hadn't left the area. It had simply retreated to the tree line, pacing, watching. "He's not gone," she said. "Just thinking about it." "You gave him something to think about," Harold said. "That's more than most people ever do." She came back to him, placing the shotgun within easy reach of the couch. His face was lined with exhaustion. His skin glistened with a thin sheen of sweat. "Pain worse?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Breathing hurts, talking hurts, being alive hurts. She sat on the edge of the couch and took his hand. "We're still here. That counts for something." He managed a weak smile. "You always did have a talent for understatement." Outside, the forest shifted into full night. The snow reflected what little moonlight managed to break through the clouds, casting a dim, grey glow over everything. The bear's shape faded in and out at the tree line, a dark blot against darker trunks. "He's waiting," Miriam murmured. Harold's eyelids drooped. "For what? For us to get tired? For an opening? For a mistake?" She squeezed his hand tighter, as if she could anchor him in place by sheer will. "You should rest," he said. "Resting is what got us into this mess," she replied. "I let myself believe isolation meant safety." "We were safe," he whispered, "until today." She looked toward the stove. The fire inside had burned down to a deep, steady glow. Enough heat for now. But it would need more wood before morning. The thought of opening the door, even a crack to reach the woodpile, made her stomach turn. "We'll make the wood last," she decided, "one log at a time, no big rushes." Harold nodded faintly. Good plan. The bear paced again, closer this time before retreating. Miriam tracked its route in her mind. Front porch, tree line, side of the cabin, back toward the shed. A slow, patient circuit. She checked the radio once more out of habit than hope. Static answered her. "We're not getting help tonight," she said softly. "Then we help ourselves," Harold replied. She nodded. It was what they had always done. On the ranch, in town, in retirement. When you lived long enough, you learned not to wait for rescue that might not come. Hours stretched. Miriam fought the heaviness in her eyelids, the ache in her shoulders. Twice she nearly drifted off, only to jerk awake at some slight sound outside. The crunch of snow, the creak of a settling branch, the soft huff of the bear's breath carried on the wind. At one point the bear came close again, its shadow sliding across the window pane. It did not test the door this time. It only paused, listening, scenting. Miriam sat motionless, barely daring to breathe. Eventually the shadow moved away. She exhaled, almost a sob. Her hand trembled as she reached for Harold's. He squeezed her fingers weakly, his grip lighter than it had been that morning. "You did well," he murmured. "You kept us safe." "For now," she corrected quietly. She listened one more time, really listened. The bear's steps were slower now, more distant. The forest began to sound like itself again. Trees, wind, small unseen lives moving through the snow. But the knowledge remained, solid and cold in her chest. The bear knew where they were, it knew the cabin, it knew them, and as long as it stayed in those woods, safety was only ever going to be temporary. Through the long hours of the night, the forest seemed to breathe against the walls. The bear's presence came and went in patterns Miriam couldn't predict, sometimes distant, sometimes so close she felt the vibration of its steps through the floorboards. Snow piled higher outside, softening every sound except the ones she feared most. Inside, Harold slept in short, shallow bursts. Pain woke him every few minutes. Whenever his breathing hitched, Miriam leaned over him, whispering his name, counting seconds until his eyes opened again. He insisted he was fine. His face told a different story. When the first thread of early morning grey slipped through the warped window, Miriam realized she hadn't slept at all. Her bones ached from cold and tension. Her hands looked older than she remembered, veins raised, skin thin, fingers stiff from clenching the shotgun through the long dark. She placed another log carefully into the stove, the flames licking upward. The warmth felt like a luxury they hadn't earned. Harold stirred. "Morning," he croaked. "Yes. We made it through the night." He blinked slowly, disoriented. He looked around as if searching for proof they were still in the same world they'd known yesterday. "Did he come back again?" he asked. "A few times." Miriam crossed to the window and peered out through the frost. The clearing was a field of undisturbed white, except for the tracks. Deep impressions looped around the cabin in wide circles, some so close to the porch they nearly touched the boards. She felt her stomach tighten. The bear had patrolled throughout the night, not wandering, guarding. She returned to Harold's side. "He's still out there. He didn't leave." Harold sighed, a sound half frustration, half resignation. "He knows we're here. We're part of his map now." Miriam sat on the edge of the couch. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the blanket tighter around him. His face was paler than before, and his breaths were shallower. "Ribs getting worse?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he nodded. "It feels like something's grinding." Her heart clenched. They were running out of time. She checked the radio again. Static. She tapped it against her palm, adjusted the antenna, tried a new angle near the window. Nothing. She lowered the radio slowly. Harold watched her movements with concern that went deeper than fear. He was studying her the way she had studied the bear. For signs, for strength, for weakening. "Miriam, you can't keep doing this alone," he said softly. "I'm not leaving you. I didn't say leave me. I said you can't do it alone." She swallowed. Her eyes drifted to the emergency box. The flares. One left. If she used it too soon, they'd have nothing. Too late, and the bear would be inside before she could light it. She stood suddenly, needing motion. The room felt too small, the air too heavy. "I'm going to check the perimeter," she said. Harold's voice sharpened. "No. You stay inside. That bear doesn't need a reason to charge. I won't open the door. I'll just look." She moved to each window in turn. The front, the side, the back. The shed stood where it had always stood, half buried in snow. Beyond it, the forest waited in a cold, heavy silence. Then something broke that silence. Not a growl, not a step, a snap. A branch cracking under weight. Miriam pressed her hand to the window and leaned closer. She scanned the tree line, her breath fogging the glass. "Please be nothing," she whispered. "Please let it be wind." A shadow shifted at the edge of her vision, then another. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The bear stepped out from behind the trees. It was bigger than she remembered. Or maybe the fear made it larger. An animal built of winter and hunger, fur thick with snow, eyes dark and assessing. It looked toward the cabin, directly toward her. She pulled back instinctively, her shoulders hitting the wall. Harold's voice floated from behind her, thin and strained. "Is he back?" "Yes," she breathed. The bear began moving again, slow, deliberate, toward the cabin. Its breath formed small clouds in the morning air. Snow crunched under its paws. Miriam rushed to Harold's side. He squeezed her hand weakly. "Listen to me," he said. "If he breaks in, don't try to scare him off. Get out through the back window. Run to the road. Someone will pass by eventually." "No," she said immediately. "I'm not leaving you." "Miriam, no." She stood, grabbing the shotgun, her body trembling from fear and exhaustion. She moved to the door, bracing herself. The bear stepped onto the porch again. Each board creaked loudly in the morning quiet. Harold struggled to sit up. Miriam shot him a look. "Don't you dare move. You'll make it worse. I can't just lie here while you—" "You can, and you will." The bear sniffed along the bottom of the door again. Then it rose onto its hind legs, towering above the entrance. The silhouette filling the frosted glass was enormous. The entire frame groaned under its weight. Miriam's heart slammed against her ribs. "Stay back," she whispered. The bear slammed its weight into the door. The cabin shook. Harold gasped, the sound sharp with pain. Miriam steadied the shotgun against her shoulder, pointing it upward. She didn't want to shoot unless she had to. She didn't want to injure it. She only wanted it to stay out. Another slam. A deeper crack splintered across the top hinge. Miriam stepped closer to the door, her body moving on instinct older than reason. "Hey!" she shouted. "Stop!" The bear paused, breathing hard, fog curling around the edges of the doorframe. Then it struck again. The top hinge tore halfway from the wood. Harold closed his eyes. "Miriam—" She didn't let him finish. She grabbed the last flare from the emergency box, struck it hard against the cap. It sputtered, fizzled, then burst into violent light. The cabin flooded with red. The bear roared, an explosive sound that vibrated through the walls. Miriam threw open the side window and thrust the burning flare outside, screaming at the top of her lungs, "Get away from us!" Sparks rained down. The bear lunged sideways, startled, then reeled back, confused by the noise and the blaze. It stomped the snow, huffing, snorting, indecisive. Miriam didn't stop. She swung the flare in a wild arc, casting harsh flashes across the snow. "Go! Go!" The bear retreated farther, shaken, disoriented. It stared at the window for a moment, eyes deep, unreadable. Then it turned. Slowly at first, then faster. It disappeared into the trees. Miriam sagged against the wall, chest heaving, the dying flare burning low in her hand. Harold's voice trembled. "Miriam, you did it." She looked at him, her vision blurring. "No, I bought time. That's all." The bear was gone. But only for now, and Harold was fading. She crossed to him, touching his face gently. His skin was too cool, his breaths too shallow. "Hold on," she whispered. "Don't you dare give up on me." Outside, the forest was silent. Inside, everything was slipping toward a moment she wasn't ready to face. Help was still miles away. The bear would be back, and Harold was running out of time. By the time rescuers reached the cabin the next afternoon, guided by a rare break in radio traffic and a snowplow operator who had reported strange tracks on the forest road, Miriam had been awake for nearly 36 hours. She stood at the doorway when they arrived, her body shaking, her face grey with exhaustion but still alert, still fighting. Harold was alive. Barely, but alive. His ribs were cracked, not broken clean through. His knee would need surgery. He drifted in and out of awareness as the paramedics worked, but every time Miriam spoke, he turned his head toward her voice. That was how they knew he would make it. The rescuers told her they'd found fresh bear tracks circling the property. The animal hadn't gone far, but it had kept its distance, likely confused or discouraged by the flare light, the noise, the strange human determination it had encountered. When they lifted Harold onto the stretcher, Miriam took his hand. He whispered something she would remember forever. "You kept me alive." "No," she whispered back, "we kept each other." As the ambulance pulled away through the snow, the forest stood silent, watching them go. Some victories are quiet. Some happen simply because two people refuse to let go. If you've ever been through a moment when survival depended on determination, not strength, share your story in the comments. Someone out there may need to hear it.